My name is Paulina Gonzales-Brito. Thank you all for joining us this morning. I'm the Executive Director of the California Reinvestment Coalition. I'm going to stand for a little bit and then I'm going to join these wonderful people who are here with me today. And before I introduce them, I want to set a little bit of a context for our time together this morning. You all have the description for today. I don't have to tell this group a whole lot, and you'll hear more from our panelists about the anti-immigrant political climate that we find ourselves in and what that means for the communities that we work with every day. We are going to discuss today organizing policy and programmatic solutions to the crisis we're facing. So you'll hear more about that today from the people up here, who I'll introduce in a bit. Maybe many of you already know them. But I want to tell you a little bit about myself, and then we're also going to hear a little bit from our panelists today about them, because this is really personal. I'm the daughter of immigrants. My father has a second grade education. He speaks very little English. Both of my parents are from Mexico. My father worked in a garment factory for most of my youth, and he came home every day tired, working hard. He came here for the American dream, like many immigrants do. And he worked hard every day to provide for us. And every Saturday and Sunday, we woke up at the crack of dawn, and trust me, I hated it as a young person, to go to the swap meet, to open up our little stand to sell kitchenware, and that was our small business. We tried that for a few years. And I remember as a young person going to, people remember Radio Shack? I don't think it exists anymore. But we tried to buy our first computer so I could do my homework. But we didn't have credit. We didn't have a credit history. So we walked into Radio Shack, we tried to buy our first computer, and we were not allowed to buy it because we didn't have credit. We walked out of there embarrassed, dejected. And my father, I remember my parents feeling really embarrassed about that and feeling really dejected. But my father fought really hard for us. And he taught me about our community's resiliency, our family's resiliency. He organized for a union in his workplace. And that to him was a part of the American dream. He didn't achieve that union in his workplace. He was fired for organizing. But eventually he became a union leader in a hotel, and we walked the picket line together. And that reminds me every day about what the fight is in our communities, what our communities are capable of. So today we're going to talk a lot about the challenges that our communities face, but we're also going to talk about the fight that our communities have in them and the resiliency they have in them. The CRC, the California Reinvestment Coalition, builds a fair and inclusive economy for the communities of color and low-income communities we work with every day. We built it with them. And we ensure that banks and other corporations invest and conduct business in our communities in a just and equitable manner. We've been doing this for over 30 years. In 2016, right after the elections, we began hearing concerns from our members and their clients about the fears resulting from the hostile anti-immigrant political environment under the new Trump administration. We surveyed our members. We began to understand the barriers facing their clients and the potential approaches to tackling these obstacles. There's a lot of institutional disconnection between the immigrant communities and financial institutions, for instance, leaving immigrants, their families, and communities in an economically vulnerable situation. Some of these obstacles take the form of discrimination by banks at the point of opening a bank account, and a lack of access to loans for small businesses, a lack of affordable housing, and lack of homeownership opportunities, and access to safety net programs as well. We heard about banks who had sent letters to their customers if they didn't have a social security number. So they had opened an ITIN account, an account with an ITIN number. They were told that if they didn't provide a social security number or proof that they were U.S. residents or U.S. citizens, their bank accounts would be closed. We heard, and we still hear, about banks asking, are you a U.S. citizen? Do you have dual citizenship? And having their accounts being frozen. What we learned from the process of talking to over 200 impacted immigrants in the Bay Area is that not only do our communities know the problems very intimately and the obstacles they're facing, but they know the solutions as well. And so Just like my dad, they know those solutions, right? And they persist and they're resilient. So that is how CRC developed the Here to Stay initiative. We can talk more about that, and I'm sure Karla will talk about it. Developing immigrant grassroots leaders to advocate for community-driven solutions is what the Here to Stay initiative is about at CRC. We have developed our first leadership development cohort this winter. They're ready to go to Sacramento to push for their community-driven solutions. They've been active in expanding CalEITC to ITIN holders. And we've been able to push banks to continue to commit to those ITIN accounts, but also to ensure that they're making mortgages to ITIN holders and small business loans to ITIN holders. You'll see, I encourage all of you to look at the AFN report that came out last year on asset building. Many of the recommendations in that report are also what we heard from communities across the Bay Area. So with that, I want to turn it over to our panelists, and I want to introduce them. We have Gabrielle Lessard. She's a senior policy attorney at the National Immigration Law Center, who's focused primarily on access to health care, but she works nationally to defend and advance the rights and opportunities of low-income immigrants, and she's been a public interest lawyer for over 20 years, so join me in welcoming Gabrielle. We have Nalleli Sandoval, Senior Director of Programs at United Ways of California. She's a Senior Director of Programs, and Nalleli works closely with local California United Ways on the coordination of various programmatic efforts, such as enhancing free tax preparation assistance, promoting and strengthening earned income tax credits, outreach, and CalSavers retirement savings. Join me in welcoming Nalleli. And last but definitely not least, Karla Guerra is a policy advisor for Unity Council. Karla has 8 years of experience in the nonprofit sector. She's an attorney at law with a postgraduate degree in family law procedures and international humanitarian law with a focus on crimes against humanity from El Salvador's University. And she is also a co-chair and lead organizer at California Reinvestment Coalition's Here to Stay initiative. Please join me in welcoming Karla. We've structured this as a conversation. I'm going to allow our panelists to introduce themselves and some introductory remarks, and then I will ask them some questions, and then we want to open it up to all of you to be able to ask them questions as well. So with that, I'll turn it over to Gabrielle.
Thank you. I want to say that it's great to be back in Oakland. And I'm going to start by talking about what NOOK does, because I have a lot of different reasons why I do this work. So, as our name does not suggest, we don't practice immigration law. We actually use 3 integrated strategies, which are policy analysis and advocacy, impact litigation, and strategic communications to promote and defend the rights and opportunities of low-income immigrants in the United States. We have a number of different areas of focus, including access to healthcare, education, and economic opportunity, as well as defending the civil rights of immigrants in immigration proceedings and the workplace. As you can all imagine, our work has been largely on the defend side for the last 2 years. So as part of that, we have partnered with the Center for Law and Social Policy to form a national coalition called Protecting Immigrant Families. And the purpose of that coalition is ultimately to advance an agenda where low-income immigrant families have access to essential supports like health care, nutrition programs, housing, all of which are under attack currently. But to respond in the short term to those attacks, which are coming in the form of proposed regulations relating to public charge. Now, if you've been following this closely, you know that the Department of Homeland Security published final public charge regulations in August, and that those have been currently enjoined by the courts. You may not know that between October and December, during the 60-day comment period on those regulations, over 270,000 comments were submitted on those regulations. When we started the campaign, we had a goal of 100,000 comments, and we were really sheepish about telling people that we had that goal because there had never been that many comments submitted on a Homeland Security regulation before. Now, obviously, our coalition was not the only source of those comments, but we have over 400 active member organizations. The membership is really diverse and includes academics who are willing to do original research for us, healthcare providers and associations, childcare advocates, religious organizations, local governments. Alameda County has been very active. So it has brought together a group of people to mobilize around this issue in a way that we had not seen previously. So since the final rule was published by Homeland Security, we have also seen an interim final rule published by the Department of State. And the State Department rule is really interesting because it totally mirrors the Homeland Security rule and provides virtually no explanation for why they are undertaking this dramatic departure from the meaning of public charge as it has been understood from the late 1800s until Homeland Security published its rule. So we consider that to be very vulnerable to legal attack. And then there's a third rule that we have not seen yet, which will be coming from the Department of Justice. We know that they are working on it because the Office of Management and Budget has been taking meetings to talk about the economic impact of that rule. And that rule will implement the public charge grounds of deportation. Now, currently, deportation on public charge grounds is extremely rare, in part because it's limited by certain decisions of the Bureau of Immigration Appeals that say that it can't be invoked unless a person has had a legal obligation to repay the cost of a benefit and that the agency has pursued that and repayment wasn't made. The only case I know of where there's actually a legal obligation to repay the cost of a benefit currently is like county health programs in Idaho. But we expect the Department of Justice regulations will revoke those decisions and open up public charge deportation to an extent we have not seen it. So my last 2 minutes, I want to talk about why I do this work. I was born in 1961. I remember the civil rights movements happening while I was an elementary school student and desperately wanting to be involved with them, but I was 7. But, sometimes in speeches I like to point out, the year I was born, segregation was mandatory in many parts of the United States. Gay people could be criminally prosecuted for being gay, and married women were not allowed to have their own bank accounts or credit ratings. So, even though it's not linear, the idea that we do move forward towards social justice is very tangible and very important to me. Another reason is the nerdiest reason you've ever heard, which is that when I was in law school, I read a GAO report about the exploitation of non-English speaking workers. My grandparents came from Quebec when, nobody really thought about that up there as being a border and never spoke English in their lives. And my father actually spoke English as a second language. So that was almost visceral to be connected to that form of exploitation in that way. And throughout my career, when I've had the opportunities, I have always tried to move forward to make the world, or at least this country, more equal for everyone, regardless of their color, background, or economic position. Now I'll turn it over to Nalleli.
Thanks, Gabrielle. Good morning, everybody. I'm Nalleli Sandoval, Senior Director of Programs at United Ways of California. Really excited to be with you here today. The first thing I would say is that I feel very, very fortunate and passionate about the work that I do at United Ways of California and previously before. The reason why that is because of our mission, the work that we do, but I think also a little bit of the background that I grew up in, and the fact that growing up, my family received a lot of help from organizations like Goodwill and United Way when institutions and couldn't receive that. So my family came here in 1995 from Mexico, escaping economic oppression basically, and also to reunite with the rest of my family who had come here in the early 80s. And growing up in a mixed status, undocumented household, I think I faced firsthand, a lot of the discrimination and the marginalization around accessing, certain services, or actually just the fear, right, of not knowing the cultural context of how to go and access the help, that we needed. So my family, never really put me in any after-school programs or, any extracurricular activities, or really access any assistance, because they weren't, sure about what would be the repercussions on that. And, they heard from other family members, don't do it, it's gonna affect, if you wanna naturalize in the future, it's gonna affect you. So, I grew up in a pretty low-income household here, in the Bay Area. And I think just having faced some of the challenges that my, family faced around labor exploitation, my dad being, withheld wages that he had worked on, my mom, being fired from jobs where they didn't want to pay her anymore. I think that sort of circled back into my passion to work around issues of economic justice and also social justice around, immigrant families. So, in my work, I feel, again, really fortunate to work around throughout the state with local United Ways, who are not only doing work, on the ground with community partners, but are also, in our role as a state association, be also working on some of the systemic causes that cause, economic insecurity for families, and, dive them deeper into poverty. So I will talk about that a little more later, but I think, that's a little bit of the context around my work.
Thank you. Hello, everyone. I'm really glad to be here with you all. Well, my name is Karla, and I am from El Salvador. English is my second language, so I do apologize if my accent sometimes may confuse a couple words. I'm an attorney also from El Salvador, and while I was there, I had the amazing opportunity to be working also with the United Nations, and this was specifically for a program that the Obama administration implemented. I'm not sure if you have heard of the Central American Minors Program, which was very successful, and we used to, through the United Nations, say UNHCR, process a lot of different cases from families that they were trying to escape violence and fleeing, their country because of different situations that they had. However, the program got completely shut down with the new administration. And after that, we saw this domino effect, right, of basically, these caravans now trying to come here. And you can see that there is a procedure, and when procedures are set in a specific to be some kind of way helping people, they work, right? But if there's no legal way to actually help people, then you get what's really happening these days. So I saw many people with tears on their face, with the dream, right, of actually, trying to have a better life or escaping something that was for sure death for them. And then they probably thought, this is my new opportunity, and they come here, but we never actually heard what happened after the process, right? You never get to see them. You basically just give them a folder, and you see them going on a plane, and that's it. What happens at the other side? And I was very fortunate to be able to come here through a fellowship and also be doing, advocacy for immigrant families. And now that's not say for the ones that are refugees, but the ones that didn't get through the program and now have crossed, a border and are here undocumented. So this passion I have, it's very personal at the same time, and I have been blessed now through working with the California Reinvestment Coalition, through the Here to Stay Coalition, so we're helping families. And now I have also joined the Unity Council, which I'm not sure if some of you may know, but we are a social equity development corporation with a 50-year-old history of helping families. And our CEO calls us a poverty fighting beast, because every day we're fighting poverty in many different ways. And this is why I really love the Unity Council, because it has a holistic approach, right? We're helping people from the moment they're born with early childhood education, workforce development, financial capability also. And we're like trying to, implement and take the programs to the other level, like senior housing, right? What happens after the people, have worked all their life? Like we're trying to also prevent displacement, right? And providing with affordable housing units. So it's a very holistic approach. And I just wanna let you know that one of the stories that I just got like last week from one of our community programs manager, and she said, we managed the BID, I'm not sure if you know what that is, that's the Business Improvement District that we have in Fruitville. It's basically the whole International Boulevard and Fruitville Avenue in Foothill, right? And there was one new merchant that we had, and she noticed that he was new. She approached him and said, oh, welcome, right? Like, you have a new store. And he said, yeah, I basically started this morning. And she asked, do you need help with like marketing, getting clients? And he said, yeah, there might be a chance, so if you can help me. So we printed out flyers for him, we set up balloons, and we actually, refer him to workshops on financial capability, how to use taxes. But he didn't seem very interested on these topics. A few months later, basically, he said that he was barely making, like his rent, and he confessed, I actually had to pull out a loan on my house to be able to get this. And now I have to pay the loan, the rent for the business, and the products that I got. So now we can see the importance of financial literacy as well, right? And some of these owners, even if the building goes for sale, they can't even buy it. Because like Paulina was saying, they don't even have the way to prove credit history, even if they have the money, right? So guess what happens after a year with this person? He was actually trying to close it. He couldn't close it because he was gonna get sued for breaking the lease. And he had to leave with more debt than we started with. So that's what we're trying to do. He'll help people to understand the importance, and also advocating for corporate policies so banks can really offer them access to small businesses with like not really high interests, right? So people can really have the possibility of shaping their lives.
Nalleli, I wanted to ask you, if you can talk a little bit about how California is responding to what's happening at the national level, and what are some of the policy responses that are happening? How are organizations like yours and some of the others here at this table doing advocacy at the state level? And how can we magnify some of those efforts like CalSavers and others? And if you could talk a little bit about that.
Sure. United Ways of California has been working across at the advocacy level around expanding the California Earned Income Tax Credit for about 4 years now. Since the creation of the credit, we advocated to create the credit and then have been working to expand it so that it could help more families in a lot of different ways. So for background, how many of you are familiar with the California Earned Income Tax Credit? Okay, many of you. Just for context, right, the California Earned Income Tax Credit is a credit that piggybacks off the federal credit and provides an income refundable credit boost to families during tax time. Since the creation of the credit, we have been working as advocates and a coalition to work to strengthen the credit and to have it also reach more families. So the credit was created and initially intended to support families at the very lowest income scale. So when the credit was first created, it was supporting families that made up under $15,000, about $14,000. As you know, under these families who are very low income often don't have a requirement to file taxes. And so we worked, really hard in partnership with other coalitions, with other organizations, to include outreach funding, right, to reach these families. And then our strategy following that was to make the credit more inclusive. So the first credit that was created actually excluded families who had self-employed, families and individuals who had self-employed income. So these were families who, had cash or 1099s who, were not wage employees. So we worked to get that up to par to, the federal credit. Even the federal credit for some, didn't have that restriction. So that was one of the changes, that we worked on, and then working, with the legislature, worked to increase the credit to make it more families eligible. So with incomes up to 22,000, around 23,000. And then consequently, we worked the way the credit is, structured. It's outdated in the sense, that when it was created, families, who were over 20, individuals who were under 24, so 18 to 24 did not qualify, and also working individuals who were over 65 also did not qualify. But we know that people are, working later into, their retirement years, and there's no reason why they should be excluded, right? So I guess, in the greater scheme of things, we're working towards making the credit more inclusive, because we understood that as, the credit got bigger, it would be harder to make the case around including more families then. So this brings us, when we started to look at ways to expand the credit, worked on expanding it to 18 to 24-year-olds, working families over 65, and also ITIN filers. For a lot of political reasons, there was this, there was pushback around expanding it to families who have ITINs, which is an individual tax identification number. So these are families who have put themselves on the radar and have said, I want to file my taxes, the government issues, when you don't have a social security number, issues an ITIN number, right, which they can utilize to file their taxes. So very conveniently, the government can take the money that they owe, but not, they're not eligible for a lot of refunds. So we've been working actually on this for the past, 2 years, have gotten really close on the past 2 years. But all that to say, the context is, even though politically it's a positive landscape in terms of having a supermajority Democrat community, there's still a lot of work that has to do on advocacy level, reaching out to legislators and just getting all the legislators on board, not excluding this population politically. So in terms of the impact of that, last year the credit was expanded substantially. The governor had this bold vision for how the credit would be expanded. And now families in this new tax year who make up to $30,000 and families with children will be eligible, and additionally families with children under 6 will qualify for this new $1,000 credit. But in terms of, which is a huge win, right, for Californians who are living in poverty, but not to say that, there's a huge chunk of communities that are being left behind the more that the credit expands. So we're looking, as the earlier, when we were looking at the expansion, at about 500,000 families with children under 6 who have an ITIN would be left out of this expansion and have been left out. At a very, very low cost, because actually we have some estimations around, there only being like about 50% of an uptake due to some, fear about accessing the credit. So there's still a lot of work that, needs to be done, and I can get into that in a little bit. But, I think that's the context that we're in, and we need to work together a lot more around working with families who are impacted by this, and then also working across different organizations around this as well.
Thank you, Nalleli. Gabrielle, I have a question for you around the public charge. You talked a bit about that, and there's a lot of questions in organizations that we talk to about how to respond to this. You talked about PIP, the Partnership for Immigrant Families, and the response, the immense response that happened there. And I wonder, in regard to the chilling effect that it has in our communities, what advice do you have for organizations, service providers, funders, advocates to respond to this chilling effect that is happening in our community in regards to, we're seeing it in the news all the time, our families are talking about it. What can you tell us?
It's tough because even when we give people accurate, accessible information, they don't believe that something else isn't going to change. But accurate, accessible information is sort of the best tool that we have. There's certain things that we know about public charge, specifically such as that it's only assessed at certain points in a person's immigration journey, that number of different categories of humanitarian immigrants are exempt, that only certain public benefits are counted, and specifically of interest to you, it's not just about benefits, even though that's all everybody ever focuses on. It is supposed to be assessed as a totality of circumstances test that considers the person's age, health, financial status, skills and experience, and family size. So there are very direct connections between the person's financial status and financial literacy and the EITC and other kinds of programs that you're in a position to support. Likewise, with respect to skills and education, there are opportunities to invest in programs that are doing workforce development or doing occupational skills training that's coupled with English as a second language training to respond very directly to public charge. But in terms of the messaging, I think that it's the groups of people who do not speak either English or Spanish are not well understood and are poorly served. And Asian immigrants are actually the fastest growing group in the United States. So that there's really a need for almost market research that really looks in a very finely segmented way at what information sources people find credible. And that would be broken down not only by primary language and country of origin, but how long people have been here, how old they are, their educational level, and the parts of the state that they live in.
Thank you, Gabrielle. Carla, you spoke about community members and some of their stories. And I wonder if you can tell us more about both the impact that some of this is having in the communities, the response that community members are having. We talked about resiliency and how our community is very resilient, immigrant community, and also how the community members are organizing themselves in response to this. Maybe some of the collaborations that are happening, the organizing that is happening in our communities, in response to what's happening at the national level and what you've been involved in, and if you can share some of that.
Sure. Yes, it's very important to know that the community is also, advocating for themselves in these days, and that's something actually very new that we're seeing, and the community is coming stronger because, there's leaders behind them that are making them feel empowered, and that is very important to acknowledge. However, we also at the Community Council believe in how powerful, partnerships can be. And this is the reason why we have worked together, with United Way. We have worked together with protecting immigrant families and also in collaboration with the Here to Stay Coalition. And now we have this cohort of impacted leaders that they're learning how to advocate for themselves. And we're talking about DACA, for example. And it's very interesting because many people could be very ashamed or scared to actually go out and advocate for themselves, knowing that they could be in risk, right? But they could feel, also how powerful it is to actually, know exactly the policies If you have the policy, if you understand the policy, you actually can get to make a change in your life and in your community. So what we're seeing is, for example, collaborations also with Alameda County Social Services. Like we have people coming from other countries with certifications, right? However, they cannot work here because their certification is not valid. So what we do is that we have a program that's called the Medical Assistant Program, where people can get trained and they can learn skills, soft skills, hard skills also, and they can actually, start working. And we have had successful stories on, how these people now are working at UC Berkeley. And there are people from the community working in the community now. And with Here to Stay, like you said, we're now advocating and training our leaders to actually go to Sacramento, and we are going to be pushing for CalEITC expansion. So it's something that we didn't see in the past because people were really scared. But now, to exist, we must resist, right? So this is what we're doing at our local level so far.
Thank you, Karla. So we may have some funders in the room, and I wonder if maybe we can go down the line here and talk a bit about, as funders evaluate their own grant-making portfolios and funding strategies, what advice or would you give funders as they look at the intersection of asset building and immigrant security? And anybody can start.
Do you want to go? Okay, I'll start. In addition to investing in the kind of workforce development and basic skills, as well as market or communications research that I mentioned earlier, I think that this is a moment where investments in the kind of community-based leadership that Karla talked about are really going to be fruitful. There's another very specific place where I think there's an opportunity for investment. We are fortunate to live in California, where the Department of Social Services funds nonprofit attorneys to provide immigration law assistance to people, but it's not enough. And there's actually a program that's run by the Department of Justice where people who work for nonprofits can be trained as accredited representatives with expertise in immigration law and the ability to actually advise people about their immigration cases. I think it's really underutilized, and it's a great opportunity to work with organizations and get more trained people out into the communities where they can help. Now you have 2 mics.
I would say, generally it's so important, and I think I'm preaching to the choir, to look at grant making from an equity lens, right? And I think specifically when it comes to asset building and immigrant security, there's just, the equity and the leveling the playing field is just that much harder, right? Because there's many things that we have to combat around, building empowerment in the community and the leadership empowerment, and then, also, when it comes to reaching these families, right? There's a lot of fear and marginalization that they're already facing. So I would say, grant making, through an equity lens, and then, one thing that we look at is in terms of what are the policy levers that are actually going to help lift the most families up, in terms of financial security. And we already know, for example, right, the CalEITC is one of the most effective poverty fighting tools. But actually, a lot of families are already at a way more disadvantaged than other families, in poverty. And I have a stat here around half of California's children already have at least one immigrant parent, and they also tend to be the lowest paid workers. And then also children who have at least one immigrant parent tend to live in poverty. And when you look at the outcomes for families who live in poverty, you're looking at, the effects that this has around not only future earnings, but also, education and health. So when we're looking, at least, from a United Ways of California perspective, we're looking at the levers that are going to help, these families achieve the best, possible outcomes in terms of health, education, and financial stability. So I would say, definitely, looking at what are the policy levers, looking at grant making, from an equity lens, and also hearing directly from the community, because we're not going to get, any of these wins without the input of the communities already on the ground. I think like Karla was mentioning, last year we had a really hard time bringing families to the forefront for very, legitimate reasons that they feel unsafe to speak about their story, but we need to do that work on the ground too, to build that empowerment and that leadership, and help families find their own voice, and build that education as well.
I think when we talk about the intersection of asset building and immigrant security, we're talking here about capital, right? And two words just come to my mind, and it's just like real estate and businesses, right? So I think there's just an opportunity for funders to find a creative way to fund people that are able to build their own, their assets, right? In two ways: entrepreneurship development and business development. And a really creative example is, I think, is Prospera. I think that's the name of them. You don't have to own papers, right, to actually run a business and have a business. So they don't even need work permits because they are not employees, right? They're workers. So this is a really creative and legal way that they are currently working in this legal liability program as well. Also, through the Here to Stay report, the coalition has suggested a couple of policies that they could be supported in different ways, and I just want to share some of with you, which is like pushing for safe banking. Like, we don't really know, some of us, when we go to a bank, how banks are really treating people that don't look like them, like don't resemble the person or the staff. But some of them are asking citizenship questions. And people even have said, I actually feel better going to this place when we know the place as predatory services because they make me feel welcome. But when I go to the bank, they start asking me for my citizenship status, and I don't really feel comfortable, so they prefer not to go. And also, when they have contracts, the contracts are in English most of the time. What about people that speak indigenous languages, like ma'am, right? What about people that can't read? They're just signing documents without not knowing what they are signing for. So also, banking access for youth. Do you know that there's actually some kind of legal gap in between the age that someone is able to work than the age that someone is actually able to open a bank account? So you actually get your first job, like internship, right, in your life, but you don't really have a way to cash out the money. So what we have to do is advocate with one of our banks for our interns, right, to actually give them the opportunity to do that. So we're advocating with MyPath, which is an organization that works directly with youth, and advocating for banking access for youth. Also, their parents sometimes don't speak English. So who are the ones that are actually helping these people, like opening bank accounts, youth, right? So it's very important. Also addressing abusive work conditions. Some people are working under the table, and because of this, they don't really get paid what they should, or abusive, schedule conditions. There is also something important, like how so are some workers being protected under the sun when they're working? How are you actually making sure that these people get to drink water during their shifts, right? If they're working under really hot conditions, like, are you making sure that it's really proper for them? Like, those are the things that the Here to Stay Coalition is also working to address. And also, like we were talking about, like access to a small business ownership. It's something that, creative ways that we can, moving forward, start thinking about. And I think it's very important to talk about urgency, right? We're talking about affordable housing, but how many people we're going to lose in the next 2 years? So it's very urgent to start, thinking about this. So.
I wanted to, Karla, I really appreciate you talking about, we often talk about public policy, but there's also a component of corporate policy and corporate accountability to all of this. And for those that are interested, there's a report on the California Reinvestment website it's called a bank guide. around some of these issues. Banks are actually interpreting the law in a very, I don't know if strict is the right way, but or a discriminatory way. And so you can find that report there. They don't have to ask these questions around citizenship, and they're just doing it in that way, in a way that discriminates against immigrant populations. So you can find that there if you have more questions in terms of what Karla's talking about. And so I think there is a public policy and then a corporate policy questions and advocacy that needs to be done there. I was interested, Nalleli, you talked about CalEITC. There was also, it was interesting to me to think about public policy, and there's been programs passed at the state level, and this is a question for all three of you actually, around, thinking about CalSavers too. And sometimes our communities are not aware of these programs, and there's often not enough resources coming down from the government to really do the outreach necessary around these programs. But was there a solution around that, first of all? And philanthropy is not going to be able to fill that gap by itself. And then what strategies have you seen that work in connecting community members to some of these programs? And then what kinds of financial resources, public benefits, or other economic resources are out there? What can we do in our, the folks in this room and others, to really connect people to some of those programs and really spread some of the facts that we need to spread, to really connect people to some of those programs that are really great programs that we need to be able to make sure that people are connected to?
Sure, so I can speak a little bit about CalSavers. How many of you are familiar? Okay, might have heard a lot of people talk about it at this point, which is good, because we're hearing, that the word's not really getting out, but, I'm glad that it is. Just, again, for level setting, CalSavers is basically a retirement program provided at the state level around making workplace retirement possible for employees. This came out of a legislation that happened back in 2016 called the Secure Choice Act, which now became the CalSavers program. What a lot of people don't know is that people who have ITINs actually qualify for the CalSavers program. So a lot of families, we're really involved in the CalSavers outreach because we think it's a way of helping families build financial security in the future, but actually, helping them just become more comfortable with savings. And we know that, this seems like really insurmountable for families who are living, day by day, but we really believe in connecting people to all, the benefits that they are eligible for. And I think it's really important to say, even though there's going to be a lot of community outreach partnerships that are needed, that, families and workers who have an ITIN are eligible to, participate in the CalSavers program. The way that it will work is actually the state has, considered not out, obviously there's not going to be an outing of these workers being undocumented, right, to their employer, because there is that employer facilitated process. So simply, if there's not a match between the Social Security and the employer who has been enrolled in the program, the employer will only know that this employer, has opted not to participate in the program, and actually the employee can then, sign up on their own through the website. So, it's important. I mean, that's complicated, right, for any of us to remember, but that leads me to my point, which is that, community partnerships are essentially going to be needed to be able to get the word out on programs. And we're building this outreach too, along with different community partners. One of the disadvantages is that there's not a lot of funding the way that there is for CalEITC to do outreach around programs like CalSavers. So, we rely a lot on, our program partnerships and our community partners to get the word out around this. And I'm also happy to, connect any of you to our program manager as well. But, it's essentially, one of the great tools that we have to build financial security around that.
I want to say that for us, there's 3 things that are currently working to inform the community and provide the resources. And the first one is one-on-one counseling. There's a lot of people that don't know that they actually can get, or receive resources, right? Like if you don't have an employment, if you receive public benefits, you can actually go to the Unity Council and we'll sit with you and we'll offer you some kind of counseling of what you can receive. And there's some different programs that Alameda County can actually give you for that. And this is the Word We OA program. Also outreach. If you don't come to us, we're gonna go to you, right? So we're going to schools, we're going to different events and actually letting them know all the different opportunities that people can have. And the third one, believe it or not, is hiring. Hiring people within the community has worked very well because they know what their community needs, right? So when they start working with us, they start knowing, there's like a Unity Council has 11 different programs. So they tell their neighbor, and the neighbor turns to their other neighbor, and that's how the whole community can get to know actually what's really available for them. So we have, for example, our LMB program, which is a Latino Men and Boys program, and we have, these amazing people that we're trying to support. LMA, which is helping Latina girls that we're also trying to support, and they, our mentors, they're from East Oakland, right? So they're from the community, and this is how we work, right? For the community and with the community. If you want a federal example, it's Head Start. Head Start is a good model because if there's parents that they want to work, there is a pathway for that, right? There's already a pipeline already built for it. So it's something that has worked for us, and we see, how successful it is.
Thank you, Carla. So I want to open it up to question and answers from any of you. If you have any for our panelists, we'd be happy to take them at this time. None? Bob?
And Paulina, I'd love you to weigh in on this question too, if you can get out of the moderator role.
Sure.
Gabrielle, you started by saying, the past 2 years, the work has largely been defensive. And I think that's the case that we've all seen and funded and participated with that. I'm curious, the value of philanthropy, the great value add is the long-term, proactive, offensive work. And I'm just curious for any reflections from any of you as to both the need to focus on the urgency of now, but what longer term should we be thinking about and doing?
Do one of you guys want to answer that? Okay. Again, I think that because we're in this moment where people just really want to do something, we've been able to pull together these large, diverse coalitions. We have seen opportunities for people at the community level to really speak up and exercise leadership in ways that they might not have felt comfortable before. And I think that hopefully in 2020, we will be at a transition point where we're able to capitalize on that momentum and direct it towards advancing positive agendas.
I think this is a really important question, Bob. I think there's both the urgency of the defensive fight that we need to continue to do, and then how do we build for, and especially in California where we have an opportunity, I think, to win some things now that can set, us forward for potentially what we can do nationally. And it's a shame, if we can't do it in California, then, what are we doing, right? And I think what Carla laid out both on the corporate and the public policy, there's like two roads that need to be done simultaneously. So there's a public policy piece that we've been, pushing, and I was disappointed with, on the CalEITC piece, the amazing organizing that's happening. And the governor said, when we met with him, I can't remember when, a few months ago, and he said, well, we're sending money to the caravan on the border. And I was like, that's not the long-term, pieces that are going to really move us forward. And so how do we really shift the narrative around what are the economic equity pieces for the immigrant population that we really need to be moving? And the CalEITC piece is one of them. And what are the other things like that we need to be thinking about? And so we're talking right now in our coalition around, what does an immigrant financial inclusion bill of rights look like in California? And really starting to have that conversation and putting that, the beginning conversation around that long term. And what would that look like, that conversation look like in Sacramento? What are the different pieces around that? Does that include youth bank accounts? Does that include ITINs? The state of California is only doing, business with banks that are making home ownership, because we know home ownership and small business lending to ITIN holders is really a way to build assets, right? Does it include that ITINs should be a way to build credit, so that credit agencies are, are creating a credit history for ITIN holders, right? Like those are just some of the percolating conversations we're talking about. And then on the corporate policy piece, we on banks, right, have an opportunity to make these loans, and so we've begun to have wins on that side of things. And so Mechanics Bank, a bank that's in the Bay Area and growing, and they're in Southern California. We were able to get a community benefits agreement where they're making these ITIN loans. And now there's also conversations around the community health promoters, community health workers, bringing that into the economic conversation. So I think it's, both the public policy, corporate policy, the urgency of now, the defensive, and then thinking long-term on both of those fronts.
Sorry.
Gabrielle, I was just
I hope I'm not, repeating, but I just want to emphasize, I think focusing on policies that help families in the long term. I think this is why United Way has, invested in supporting, these type of policies around, CalEITC, the California Earned Income Tax Credit, making sure that everybody is under that tent, right? Including immigrant families, because we do think there's just so many adverse effects to poverty around education, around health, around long-term outcomes, that if we were able to shift, not to say, that CalEITC is the end-all be-all, right? But if we're able to shift the tide in terms of, supporting those families in sense of bringing them above the poverty line, I think, then we will continue to see the long-term effects of that, hopefully in the future, right? So same thing with, I can speak for CalSavers, right? Because we believe it's an opportunity to help families, invest in their own future, right? And already building on this resiliency, right, that we talked about that immigrant families have around, and making, increasing, their capacity to save for the future, to have a nest egg. And then I think another conversation that we need to have is also protecting those assets, right? And the light of, deportations, and the light of, children being, ripped off from their families, and families facing this consistent, attack on, will I have that money available? So I think we need to have that conversation too, of like, how do we support families in protecting their assets so that they don't feel that fear, or, I don't think they can ever not feel that fear, but, ameliorate that fear in some concrete way.
I also believe because of the urgency that's happening right now, and we have a very big opportunity around the corner. I mean, 3 actually. We have Census 2020, which is around the corner, right? And many people don't even know what the census looks like, or the importance of filling it out. Voter registration as well. And some people are even confused in between, can I fill out the census? Because I'm actually undocumented here, I'm a J1 visa holder, and they don't really know the importance. So it's really important for communities to actually be aware and educated on this. And also with public charge, the way to empower people and kind of avoid the chilling effect, even though the damage is already done, it's actually, doing this community education, right? And letting them know you're still able to apply for things. There's lawsuits right now happening, and explaining what that means, right? I also believe that sometimes innovation can be such a great thing, such a great tool, but sometimes also it can be a mistake, right? When there's a crisis happening, I think it is important to actually invest in something that is already proven that's working, strategies that you see outside that are working. What is working right now? Helping people find jobs, early head start education, financial capability works. So let's scale them, right? Let's just make it, so everyone can really get access to that. So sometimes also something just was brought to me last week that I have never heard of, and I'm not sure if you have, but it's investing in trauma-informed place practices. Have you heard of that? What is this? Poverty is horrible. It can really change someone biologically, right? So if people don't really address their trauma, some behavior sometimes cannot be changed. So are we really investing in these things? So help us scale, or what we're doing here and making, have a better impact in people's lives. So.
Pat, did you have a question?
Yeah, so I have a couple or several questions. So one was about the issue of financial institutions asking about citizenship, which is shocking to me. And I'm just wondering if you can speak a little more about that, whether that's a new wave that sort of has happened in the wake of the Trump administration, the sort of these issues. That's one question. The other has to do with the public charge and the chilling effect. And Carla, you mentioned, community education as being a mitigating force. But I was also interested in knowing, Gabrielle, any thoughts that you have in terms of what can be done at the community level to help to support the immigrant community that is feeling really concerned, about what to do. And then the third question was also, it was sort of about uptake at the CalEITC. So for Nalleli, we knew with the federal EITC, uptake has always been, with all the public benefits programs. And so I'm just wondering if you can talk a little bit about if you're making any headway in figuring out strategies.
Yep.
So I'll start with the financial institutions asking about citizenship and whether this is new under Trump. It's not new under Trump, actually. I think there's been, it's complicated in that there's been kind of these anti-money laundering, it's kind of Bank Secrecy Act, Patriot Act,
Right.
going back, years. But what I will say is that under the Obama administration and the bank regulators there, we were able to have a better response, and that the banking regulators were able to tell the banks, actually the law is, broad, and you can, you don't have to interpret it this way. And we were able to work with the banking regulators to kind of push back against some of these practices. Under the Trump administration, because we don't have, the banking regulators are in a whole new regime, we don't have that same type of ability to do that. And so it's a much more difficult, road. And so we've been able to use litigation with, or threats of litigation in some cases to be able to try to push back against some of these practices, and we'll continue to do that. And public pressure and others. And so I think those are the tools we're using now in terms of discrimination. And so I'm not a lawyer, so I won't try to explain some of that, but just generally that's what's in our toolbox right now. The public charge question.
Regarding public charge, I think I'm going to start by pointing out what resources we have available. We have a website that's called protectingimmigrantfamilies.org. And on that website, we have community-facing resources, including templates that can be modified with local information that use like a visual of a stoplight to help people walk through whether or not they would be subject to a public charge determination. I think it's that kind of simple, accessible message that doesn't get to the whole thing that is going to be most effective with communities. Also, just made public today, there is a new web-based tool called, I have to look, keepyourbenefitsca.org, and it's tus beneficios públicos in Spanish, and that is also a text or cell phone-based tool that people can use to walk through an assessment of whether they would be subject to public charge. I think that second tool in particular is really effective because it's person to person. And we know from our experience getting people to enroll in the Affordable Care Act through Covered California that it was those individual assisters working directly with people that was most effective in immigrant communities, particularly some of the smaller communities like the Chinese-speaking community. Again, I go back to my initial observation that we really need a better understanding of who is getting their information where and whom they trust. I think that things that utilize social media can be effective because, again, it's that person-to-person approach, but it's on a larger scale.
The outreach, I think, fortunately, we have seen an uptake in terms of the CalEITC that people are receiving. So in 2017, when the credit first started, we had the Franchise Tax Board estimated about 600,000 families would be eligible, and only about 385,000 families actually claimed the credit. You know, as of 2018, and I have that here, more than 2 million claims have been issued for families who have received the credit. So I think we are making some headway. I think there are still intrinsic challenges around reaching families, you know, who are at the lowest income of the scale. And, you know, there's always a churn in terms of like people being eligible, whether they fall in or out of the eligibility. So, you know, there needs to be a continued, you know, outreach campaign from trusted messengers to be able to connect people to the credit, I believe. And then we, you know, one of the things that we feel really strongly about is not only connecting people to the credit, but also making sure that they're keeping, you know, all their money in their pockets. And we've heard stories of people even, you know, paying like $400, $600, and that's not unusual, right? You know, paid tax preparers taking all the money from the credit. So they never really see the effect, these people, you know, who are going through that. So we've tried to connect as much as possible with, you know, opportunities for free tax preparation services as well. So that's another thing that, you know, we feel really strongly about. But next year we have about, I believe, 3 million families to reach. So, you know, in terms of accessing the credit. So I think, you know, as the credit has strengthened, that's a great thing, but we also need to, you know, continue the outreach around that.
I also want to answer the first question on the citizenship question that's been asked by banks, and there's two problems right there. The first one, it has to do with public policy and laws. There's actually no law that requires banks to say, you know, you need to show improved citizenship. But on the other side, there's no law also as well that doesn't, you know, let banks ask this question, so they can. So we need to advocate, and there's a bill that I will be very glad to share with you that is actually advocating so banks don't have the power to actually start asking this question, right? And then at the corporate level, we're actually, you know, trying to work with banks and credit unions as well, and letting them know, you know, this is what's happening, this is what the law is, this is what we're advocating for, this is what you can ask, and this is what you cannot ask, right? People need to know as well. And then on the chilling effect on public charge and what can be done besides outreach, I want to share with you an example. And you know, the Kaiser Foundation and Marin County partnered in the past to provide healthcare policies for undocumented children. And that was a program that was working very well, but apparently it went down.
I'm not sure if you can share something about that, but that shows that there is a need to provide funds to service providers.
I actually can give you an update when you want to.
Okay, that's great. So there's actually, this shows that there is a need to provide funds to service providers that can, moving forward, provide medical insurance this doesn't come from federal money. So these people can actually get access to health without becoming public charge. Right? So that's
Thanks, Carla.
Thank you.
Did you want to?
Just really, really quickly, I think what you may be referring to is a program that Kaiser Permanente started back in 1997. Kaiser Permanente, Kaiser Cares for Kids Child Health Program. And we created it before the Federal Healthy Families Program. And so the good news, and then different places created their own. It was basically to have comprehensive, affordable health care coverage for children who wouldn't be otherwise eligible for either employer or for government programs. And sort of the good news is that in California, the state of California expanded coverage for people, so children are now able to get coverage now up to age 19.
But
So
as of
there's-
January 1st,
it'll be up to
age 26.
Right, so we
And-
kind of worked our way out of that particular niche, which is a great thing, that more people were eligible and able to get expansion coverage through the state, and we're still a healthcare provider.
right. So you have an expert in the room, right?
Right.
So-
And just another note on that, which is that the only state or locally funded benefits that would be considered for public charge purposes are cash assistance for income maintenance. So CAPI, if you're in a county with general relief, that's considered, but the children's and young adults Medicaid expansions are entirely state funded. They can't be considered. Everybody who's Pro-Call, if you're familiar with that language, are also state funded. And then within the DHS regulations, healthcare for kids up to age 21, and healthcare for pregnant women, including 60 days after the end of the pregnancy, are also not included for public charge purposes.
So we're almost out of time, and maybe we can go quickly down. First of all, thank you for the questions. Is if you can just tell us one thing that we can all do, a call to action as we leave today, that we can do to advance immigrant, asset protection and economic security as we leave here.
Okay, I want to build on something Nalleli said, which is the importance of having people prepared to protect their assets in the event that they're deported. It's hard to get people to think about this. We talk to them about making arrangements for their children, and we talk about it as being like having your earthquake kit. It's not likely to happen, but you want to be ready just in case. But a lot of undocumented people are homeowners or business owners, or otherwise have assets that are just going to be in limbo if they're deported. So people really need to have plans to have those assets passed to a trust, or to have somebody act as can't think of the word for it, but as their agent in the event that they are deported.
Yeah, I would say, is this on? Okay, it says it's on, but I can't hear it. I would say in terms of, making systemic change and, investing in policies that promote asset building and, immigrant security, I think, there's many ways that, community partners and specifically, grant makers can help with that. And, if it's not investing in those programs, I think there's a huge role to play in terms of even lifting up, right, voice of advocacy and maybe co-authoring an op-ed or reaching out to the channel. So I think there's still that role, right, where people can, maybe access different channels that other partners. And we believe strongly, around working with, not only the community on the ground, but also, community partnerships. And that's why we work around, in coalition. And I think, if our voices are lifted together, there's bigger impact, right? So I think even, making a statement around the importance, of policies that promote asset building and immigrant security is really important. And I second what Gabrielle said.
I think it's important for everyone in this room to help us and, scale every single success story that you hear. What's really working out there, this is exactly what we need to invest on, right? We have a new program, people that are waiting for opportunities, interns, right? So it's important to have connections, like saying, you don't have anyone that you know to have a job. Well, the Unity Council's reputation, because of this, we have our connections, we have our partners. These connections to your partners can be your partners. They can be your opportunity. So what are we doing to bring the opportunities to youth? Right? To bring the opportunities to low-income families and advocate for them. What are we doing to join other coalitions that we know, right? Try to find out what the county is also doing, right, around these public policies. And I think that's what really matters right now. Get involved, like with the census that's coming and voter registration as well. See if there's any programs that involve holistic approaches and psychosocial approaches as well. That's very important.
Thank you, Karla. And thank you all for joining us this morning. Enjoy the rest of the conference.
Thank you.